Hey everybody, and welcome to Let's Look at Defense Technica. If you take the initials of Defense Technica, DT, and reverse them, then you will have the genre of the game. This is a tower defense game, very much a traditional tower defense game. This is not an Orcs Must Die, where you play as an avatar and then you have a weapon and you place turrets, but also you're doing like some third-person combat. It's not a Dungeon Defenders, where you got like that plus multiplayer aspects, nor is it a Sanctum or anything like that, or even like a Prime World Defenders. This is a raw tower defense game set in kind of like a hard sci-fi universe. And we're gonna get started playing this. This comes out on Steam on Thursday, which is probably the same day that this video goes up. And it's $12 for its opening week sale, and it's gonna be $15 after that. So we're gonna start the game here. And why don't we start on like level 4 maybe? Let's start on level 2. Level 3, which is maybe a little bit easier. I apologize for my indecision there. I have played literally 61 minutes of Defense Technica. And when it comes to tower defense games, you know, the learning curve is not really that big of a deal anymore. This is probably something like the 30th or 40th tower defense game that I've played over the course of my channel's lifespan. So I'm very familiar with how these games work, even though, for the most part, I am very bad at them. Let's talk about the universe a little bit. Basically, this is a fairly standard, by-the-numbers sci-fi story from what I've seen so far. It's told in the form of, you know, kind of an opening expository, apologize for my verbal diarrhea there, expository kind of text plus image splash that's like, we're the good aliens, and then something something bad aliens, and we've been at war for thousands of years. So we're placing these towers to basically stop the bad aliens from coming and destroying our core. So this is our core down here. You can see that it's got 100% health over there at the top. We also have resources. We use those resources to build towers. Bob's your uncle. You've probably understood what's going on now. What's kind of cool about this is that you do have a little bit more freedom with maze building in this. And not freedom is maybe not the right word, but the mazes that you can build with your towers and your barricades are a little bit larger and kind of more winding than the barricades that you can otherwise build sometimes. So for example, barricades cost 25 resources. So I believe if I drop down like a barricade here and here, by the way, by building my first tower, the enemies are now going to start to move towards us. But as you can see, this has now kind of changed the trajectory that the jerkwad aliens are going to take as they walk through here. And we also usually start with, I'm going to build just a Gatling gun turret, just a very basic, or sorry, submachine gun turret, just a very basic kind of like machine gun turret that you see in basically every tower defense game. And all these little like alien bloodseekers are going to come by this way. And it's also got like kind of a weird Plants vs. Zombies mechanic where, you know, you mouse over or use your 360 controller to kind of pan over the resources that drop when enemies die, kind of like you're picking up the glorious sunflowers in Plants vs. Zombies. And this allows you to get more resources, which allows you to build more turrets, as one might expect. So it's tower defense. It is definitely its purest form. What's a little bit different? Oh, please, God. Maybe I can put like a stabber in here or something and have a chance, because otherwise these guys are going to get to the core. Sure, I've got just enough resources to make a stabber turret, which is like a melee turret which will punch these guys. Come on. I don't think this guy is going to be capable of dying. Oh, you're so close! What can I possibly use to kill you? Maybe there's going to be more resources down here that I can pick up, and I'll build a turret close to the core itself. Because otherwise our core is actually going to start taking some damage here. This is probably actually worse than I did when I played this off camera, but that's to be expected. You know, there is some something to be said about talking while you play a game, but eventually we do get to the point where we can actually heal our core using a special skill. So I guess we're just going to put a stabber down here, and that'll defend this. It's not the ideal. I would much rather put down like flame turrets and stuff like that, but we're going to need more resources to make that happen. So basically what I was trying to get at is it's kind of cool that the level has some kind of like predetermined architecture before you get in here. Like it's almost as if someone has been here before and it's lived in, you know? There's other turrets that have been set up in kind of ideal positions, which is kind of cool. So mostly, I think this game places a little bit more of a focus on barricading than a lot of tower defense games. Oh no, what have I done? We should barricade this so that more enemies can't come through this way. This being said, how am I gonna murder these guys now? It's like not even possible unless I pick up some more resources and then maybe put like a Gatling turret down here or something. I'm not even sure if that'll hit it. Machine gun Gatling, you know what I mean. It's very poor play so far. But yeah, you know, there are other games that focus a lot on barricading, Sanctum being one of them, or Super Sanctum TD being one of them. But this one certainly is more of a focus on that than something like, you know, Go Home Dinosaurs, for example, which is, please tell me I can shoot them, good. Go Home Dinosaurs was much more of just like a pure, you know, here's a variety of towers that you can put down kind of game. Oh my god, I actually do not have the range necessary to hit these guys that are attacking my core over here. This is a very easy level. Like I said, this is like the third level in the game. This is a game that is, I wouldn't necessarily call it exceptionally difficult so far. Some of the levels, they seem to vary wildly in difficulty, some of them being very, very difficult even on the normal difficulty, and some of them being pretty easy on normal difficulty, even though they're a little bit further along in the game. And, you know, you can see the number of waves down there, and oftentimes the final wave will indeed contain... We should really throw down like some kind of flame turret or something like right here to really hit all these enemies in an area of effect. But you will oftentimes have like a big wave that comes at the end. It may take the form of kind of like really heavily armored units, and there's only a few of them, or it may take the form of a swarm of units that are fairly easy to kill, but there are a goddamn ton of them, and occasionally, very occasionally, there will be a lot of units that are also heavily armored, and those are, of course, the most difficult. And there are somewhat traditional boss fights, like, well, not traditional boss fights, but traditional for the tower defense genre, boss fights that are, you know, just one very, very heavily armored target. Basically what I'm getting at is a tower defense game. If you've ever played another tower defense game before in your entire life, you understand what's going on here, and, you know, hopefully if you're watching this, you're at least interested in the tower defense genre. If you're not interested in the tower defense genre, and you're watching for some point other than, you know, entertainment from hearing me, maybe for some weird reason I'm entertaining to you, which I couldn't imagine why, then you could probably turn off right away, because this is, if you don't enjoy tower defense, you are not going to enjoy Defense Technica by any stretch of the imagination. But it is, you know, tower defense is one of those weird genres that I always am amazed when people are like, yeah, like, I'm a huge fan of tower defense games. Like, I play all of the tower defense games that come out, and I like them all, and I'm a connoisseur. Like, hey, tower defense games have never really grabbed me. There have been tower defense games that I've enjoyed to a certain degree, usually for reasons that most people find them kind of not so great. Like Unstoppable Gorg, which came out in like February of 2012. I was like, I like this game because it's got a weird kind of 50s retro sci-fi aesthetic to it, which is kind of neat. Okay, so I've defeated the enemy. Presentation leaves a little bit to be desired, I would say. You know, enemy defeated, mission success, congratulations. You don't necessarily need that much more than that, but since the game does start with kind of an opening expository story, it's weird that there's no kind of story beats in that. It brings up kind of a, it's not really a hot button issue, because that makes it sound more grandiose than it actually is, but an issue with me, which is like, if the story in your game is just going to be like an opening kind of like prologue into how things are going, like, I'm not even sure if I can get back to that at some point. It's not essential by any stretch of the imagination, but if that's all your story is going to be, and then also like 2 sentences of text before these missions that serve as just kind of a pretense to get you into the mission, I think it's okay to not have a story. Like, the story in this game and a lot of other games that I play kind of in this same vein kind of reek of, that's obviously a very offensive way to put it, but they do kind of reek of, like, we need to have a story in this game, otherwise people are going to complain and they're not going to know why they're playing it. But I think it's fair to say that there is probably literally nobody on Earth, outside of maybe the developers themselves, that is going to play this and be like, yeah, you know, the story is really good. Like, the story made this a better experience. I don't think the story made it a worse experience. I don't think it has to exist. You could just call this tower defense game, and I would be totally okay with that. This is sci-fi tower defense. I know what I'm getting into, and it really doesn't change the experience that I have with this. But anyway, after you complete a level, you can see there's no like multiplayer mode or anything like that. There are leaderboards though and achievements. But after you complete a level, you do get stars and medals, and you can use these stars and medals, well, the medals specifically, to unlock things like upgrades for your tower. So there is kind of like an RPG system for each tower. Let's go to our machine gun turret. As you can see, I have unlocked the second level for it, and I was using 160 resources to occasionally upgrade it within the actual level that we played. So you don't actually have the upgrades automatically unlocked for each tower. You have to unlock them yourself with medals. I can't actually upgrade anything else here, so I wonder if that shows up a little later in the game, and maybe you can choose which kind of upgrade tree you want to go with. That's kind of cool if it gives you the option to go for like higher damage or higher fire rate or something like that. That's some kind of customization that I like. Why don't we go with, I'll upgrade my homing SAM turrets. This will cause them to do more damage and fire more frequently. Obviously, it's going to be more expensive as well. But as a result of upgrading this, then my surface-to-air missile turrets will be better, which is good because we are going to go to maybe a flying level next. Why don't we go to Floating Islands 1? And this will demonstrate kind of a little bit of a complaint I have about the game, which is that when you have levels, normally when you have text, or not text, sorry, when you have like terrestrial troops, that's what I was going with, it's very easy to see where enemies will go with, and it's also very easy to see, what path enemies will take, and it's also very easy to see how that path will change based on the turrets that you put down. When it comes to flying enemies, it seems a little bit more fluid and also a little bit more obtuse as well. By the way, I should point out, I'm using the 360 controller, which is foolish of me. It works, and like the game has inbuilt support for it, but it also, like, I can't pan to the edges of the screen with it like this. I can use my mouse, though, and go a little bit, I don't know, smoother, but it controls fine with the 360 controller. It's just sometimes, like, I can't see the things I necessarily want to see. Although I guess it's kind of like that with the mouse as well. Disregard that. I don't know what I'm talking about. So let's just wait a second. We can see that enemies are going to spawn over here in this bottom left corner, and they're going to fly in like this and across here and then land here. Okay, so why don't we build a surface-to-air missile turret here, and hopefully this will help us out. But then there's also eventually going to be enemies coming from over here and all the other ways as well. Suffice it to say, I much prefer the traditional, or more traditional, I guess I should say, levels where you have a mixture of ground and flying enemies that you're dealing with, as opposed to these levels where it's going to be exclusively flying. And I think this is almost like a tutorial level or like a proof of concept or something to basically be like, hey, check it out, there's flying enemies in the game. So maybe this is a criticism that doesn't necessarily apply greatly as things get a little bit further along. But still, you know, I've played missions past this one, and the complaint still stands to a certain extent, I think. I should probably also... Where do the next enemies spawn? Over here. Okay, well, they're already in. Maybe I'll save up and get my surface-to-air missile turret upgraded next. It's going to cost $272, if you recall. I do have some other complaints about the game, actually, and these complaints kind of culminate in me thinking that this is probably not the best game, even if you are a fan of tower defense games. There's probably other choices from this year or years past that you're probably better off going with. One of these complaints being that, you know, visually I find it kind of, I mean, I don't think it necessarily looks bad, but I do think it looks pretty generic. It's got kind of this, like, I'm going to catch flack for this, but it's got kind of like this StarCrafty type aesthetic, which is fine, you know, it looks maybe like a world in the future could plausibly look. I don't know, I'm not a futurist, but it does look sort of generic as well. It's just like metallic units flying at metallic units, and for me that's a little bit boring and it doesn't have that much character associated with it. Let's put down another surface-to-air missile here. Additionally, I think this is a serious problem. There's no fast-forward button, and you know, I don't constantly replay levels like I have a serious case of tower defense OCD, or TD OCD as I call it, but the lack of a fast-forward button, this is something that exists in almost every other tower defense game, traditional or not, is the ability to speed up time, because when you already have your towers set up in the way that you want them to be set up, basically it's just a waiting game, right? Especially when you get into the later waves and, you know, you've already filled up most of these spaces where you can actually build towers. It's a little frustrating to just be forced to kind of sit around at the default speed. And, you know, I'm not good at tower defense games, but even though I suck at them, I traditionally play them at the highest speed just because that gets things done the quickest. And I find out if there's a hole in my strategy, I find out a lot faster. And, you know, I don't necessarily think this is a game that is... I guess I've lowered the range on my turrets. Oh, no, I haven't lowered it. That's because of the weather. So the dynamic weather effects is something that's interesting about this game in comparison to some other tower defense games, which do not have something like that. But in any case, what was I getting at? Oh, the fast-forward button. It's kind of like... I don't think this is necessarily a tower defense game where you have to interact with the game very quickly in order to accomplish something. The vast majority of the time, it's you plan, and then you kind of watch things go down, and you build concurrently with that, but you don't necessarily need to be paying attention all the time and be like... The only reason you have to be like constantly paying attention is to pick up the resources that fall down, even though you do pick up some of them automatically. So, I don't necessarily find it a game that requires constant input like that, so to not have a fast-forward button seems like a very strange choice to me, is what I'm getting at there. I haven't really talked about this, but in terms of turrets, you know, we can just post up here for a second, and you can see the variety of turrets that I have so far. There's a melee turret, which is, you know, stabs enemies. There's a machine gun turret, very standard. Surface-to-air missiles. This game does seem to focus a little bit more on kind of like aerial combat, or a mixture of ground and aerial combat than a lot of other tower defense games. The Magnum turret is a slowing turret, aka, you know, like a freezing turret, or a you know, goo turret that you might see in other games. And also we have a flamethrower, which is kind of like an area of effect damage turret that you've seen in other games as well. So I certainly don't think that Defense Technica is necessarily a bad game, but from a standpoint of someone who has played a lot of tower defense games within the past 2 or 3 years on Steam, it's probably not one of the standout ones that I would recommend the most, especially at this price point, which a lot of people, I think, will be struck by that as kind of a premium level price point. If you want a traditional tower defense game, or a somewhat traditional tower defense game, I think Prime World Defenders is probably going to be a little bit more up your alley. I think Go Home Dinosaurs, don't let the fact that it looks a little bit kiddie and cartoony fool you. That is an awesome, very pure-ish tower defense game. I'm trying to think of some other stuff. Super Sanctum TD is also really awesome. It's got kind of like a SNES aesthetic to it, and again, it's got almost exactly the same style of gameplay as this. It just doesn't look like this, and I think I might prefer that as well. Again, not to say that this is a bad game or a failure by any stretch of the imagination. It's just not necessarily what I would consider to be the pinnacle of the genre. And 15 bucks, I do have to admit, does strike me as a little bit offensive for a game like this. And I'm usually the kind of person who defends relatively high price points for games, because, you know, I'm an adult, I live in the real world, people have to get paid for their work, and I certainly don't think there's anything here from like an asset standpoint or a technical aspect that doesn't warrant a $15 price point. The only reason I say that is because there are, you know, other games in this niche which accomplish the same thing and are a little bit cheaper. So it's more like out of the developer's interest, I think, that maybe this would attract more attention if it was a little cheaper. But, you know, I don't work in marketing, so at least not in a literal sense. So I have no idea. I'm not going to tell them what to do. I also kind of wish there was a zoom out function. Maybe there is, and I haven't noticed because I'm playing on the 360 controller. Maybe mouse wheel. Nope. There's a zoom in function, which at this point just seems like it's ridiculous. I don't need to look this closely. But this is as far as it zooms out, which kind of doesn't really let me get a good picture on the entire map. So, I mean, I hope that this comes across not as griping. All of my complaints of the game are relatively minor. It's just they kind of do culminate to make this not the best tower defense experience that I've ever had. I've played TD games recently that have had more interesting quirks. Tower Wars, for example, is kind of neat in that it has, you know, it's multiplayer focused. Super Sanctum TD has that kind of SNES aesthetic. This is the weird boss battle coming at the end, by the way. Go Home Dinosaurs is, you know, more frantic and more frenetic, and it perhaps even more zany fun as well. Anomaly 2, I think, has a better story. It's also got kind of a weird twist on the genre. It's got multiplayer modes. It's a reverse tower defense. And there's nothing wrong with just being like a straight-up tower defense game, but, you know, this might be a game that appeals more to tower defense purists than someone like me. So now that we have picked up some more medals, by the way, those were not the only turrets in the game. There are also, you know, like I've got this ray gun turret that maybe I can... we can set it up if we want to, or I could upgrade it, but I've never actually been able to place a ray gun turret, so I think maybe I have to get a little bit further in the game. That's kind of the other thing as well, is that the game is a little bit slow with its tutorialization, and that's fine, except that it's 2013, and I realize not everybody has played a ton of tower defense games, but I'm assuming probably everybody has at least played some tower defense games by this point, so I don't necessarily need, like, I know this is a machine gun turret, I know it's a flame turret, I don't necessarily need that kind of level of laborious explanation, and I kind of just want to get into the cooler stuff, if there is cooler stuff in this game, faster. But I've never been able to use a mortar turret, I've never been able to use a ray gun, even though I've actually purchased them. I thought I purchased an upgrade for the ray gun, but maybe I didn't save after I did that. But it is worth noting there are rock, scissors, paper mechanics at play here. As you can see, for each turret there is, first off, the stats, obviously, damage, fire rate, and range, but also you can see whether it attacks on the air, on the ground, or both. Stabber is ground only, flame is ground only, ray gun is ground only, but then the SAM should be air only, and so on and so forth. So only a few of them actually, only one of them actually attacks both. Additionally... what was I going to say? Oh, there's like, you can see what enemies it's effective against and what enemies it's ineffective against. So machine guns, effective against biological enemies and light enemies, but mechanical and heavy enemies, not very good. Stabber, good against mechanic and light enemies, but not effective against biological enemies. Now, we can probably find something that's good against heavy enemies. I'm going to assume that maybe that would be like the mortar. No, okay. Maybe there's nothing that's actually good against heavy enemies. Which would be a little strange. Yeah, it appears not. Anyway, what I'm getting at basically with Defense Technica here, it's 15 bucks. It's a very traditional tower defense game, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it doesn't necessarily do enough for me, and I don't necessarily think that there's enough robustness to the game and enough kind of addictive nature to the game to have me feel comfortable about recommending it for 15 bucks. But certainly, if this goes on sale in a Steam sale and you're a fan of tower defense games, you could do a lot worse than picking this up. I just don't think this is a must purchase, and especially if you're someone who is not particularly interested in the tower defense genre, this doesn't really do much to kind of sway you. And I do need to kind of harp on that point a little bit, because with a lot of other tower defense games, and I realize I spent like half of the video of this game talking about other tower defense games, but, you know, sometimes that is warranted. With a lot of other tower defense games, you know, you can say, well, even if you're not into tower defense, this does something different, so maybe you'll be interested in trying it out. This one is tower defense. It's like, I'm not into Victorian period pieces. Well, maybe don't go watch Pride and Prejudice on the Lifetime Network, right? Maybe wait for something that's a little bit hipper and see if then that strikes your fancy more. Defense Technica is definitely for diehard fans of the genre. I don't think it does enough to make me interested in it, and certainly not interested enough to really heartily recommend it at full price. But as always, if you are a fan of tower defense games and you want to check this out for yourself, there will be a link in the video description to pick this up on the Steam store page. It's going to be $12 opening week sale, $15 after that. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to click the like button. It does help me out a great deal. Subscribe if you want to see more first impressions on games like this in the future, or games in general in the future. And of course, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.